We hear a lot about this new multipolar world with various power blocks, China, India, the EU, Europe, US. But in many ways, we're also entering a quite binary or bipolar future of a rising electoral state and a United States that's doubling down on being a fossil fuel power, trying to force even Europe into greater dependency on fossil fuels again. What is your view on the emerging role of China here, Bill? You wrote China was working to own the future. Personally, as much as I respect what China is doing for the energy transition, that quote worries me. And I wonder if it doesn't worry you that China could be owning our future.
I'm well aware that if I'd spent my life doing in China what I've spent it doing in the United States, I would have spent my life in jail. So it's not like I'm a huge fan of the Chinese regime. On the other hand, they're a nation looking rationally at the future around them. They faced extraordinary problem in that their cities were becoming essentially unlivable from pollution, and in a matter of a few years managed to turn that around. In the process, building an industry. I mean, they've made their bet on this electro stack of technologies, where the United States has made its bet, I think an unwise one, on AI as our driver for the future. I think it's unwise, if only because it's going to be, there's no moat around AI the way there is around the factories that are churning out the stuff of China. But in any event, I can say this, and Ed can. I think it's been remarkable to watch over the last 9 months a country surrender technological and economic primacy. All this stuff was invented in the US. The first solar cell, 1954, Bell Labs, Edison, New Jersey. The first industrial wind turbine, 1943, 30 miles south of my house in Vermont. The lithium ion battery, on and on and on. And we've now tossed this away. Our president went to the UN and gave a speech, which I think is perhaps the dumbest speech in the history of the UN, not a high bar to clear, it must be said, but in which he explained that green energy doesn't work and that climate change is a con job and a hoax. The short-termism of the US in regard to this is breathtaking. And it is rewriting the geopolitics of the world. You could sense it in Belém, because with that technological and economic primacy is naturally going to follow a kind of political leadership. But the difference is, and I'll just return to this quickly, the difference is if you go get green technology from China, you buy it once and then you depend on the sun and the wind. That's a very different prospect than going to Russia or Saudi Arabia or the US and buying LNG, which you then set on fire and have to buy some more of tomorrow. One is renting forever and the other is buying to own, at which point you then depend on the sun, which has had heretofore an enviable record of coming up pretty much every morning.
Well, you say that. Look, I think the case of China is really, really interesting because obviously I think there's plenty of reasons to be cautious about China, its dominance of the economic supply chain, and for a number of other reasons. What really struck me, having said that, about COP30 in Belém, and there's an article by Li Gao, the Chinese minister, which came out during COP, which is really worth reading. That of all the countries there, I would say China was one of the most keen on an agreement. That they have set their faith in these multilateral processes, and what Li Gao says in this article is there's 3 reasons why this really matters to China. 1, resource intensity. So in other words, the shift to renewable energy because it creates less resource intensity. 2, the economic potential. And 3, the climate crisis and the impact of the climate crisis. And I think the way I think about it as far as the climate aspect of this is concerned is it will be negligent not to engage with the world's largest emitter. And also, I don't want to sound like the sunny optimist about everything in this, because I think there are huge challenges, as Bill has said. But if Bill and I had been talking 15 years ago, and I wish China's target was more ambitious, but if we'd said China will have an absolute cut in emissions by 2035, as they do in their NDC, I don't think we would have believed it.
And their carbon emissions are down on the year this year. I mean, they're going to beat their target, I think. More to the point, they're driving down everybody else's. I mean, look, I haven't been to China for the last couple of years, but talking to people there, something that really stuck in my mind. They said Beijing and Shanghai are way, way quieter than they were a year ago because everybody's driving EVs. That's good news for Beijing and Shanghai, but the real news is for the rest of the world. Anybody counting on fossil fuel growth, on if reform wants to go drill in the North Sea and send oil, there's not going to be a market for it. China is leading this transition away. The other piece of good news is there's nothing stopping anybody else from setting up factories to build solar panels. And indeed, lots of people now are. And I think that the big action in the next few years is going to be watching the Indians figure out how to jump into this.
I mean, look, that's the other thing I'd just say, sorry to interject, but, the fact is, Trump did say he was leaving the Paris Agreement, and people said, is there going to be a domino effect? I don't say in any way that the agreement that was reached in Belém was perfect, far from it, but 193, 194 countries said, look, we're going to keep the show on the road. We believe in multilateralism, we do believe in Paris. I think there is a significance to this.
And a bunch of countries signed up to join Colombia and the Netherlands in talking about fossil fuel transition in the spring.
I meant to ask, Ed, you led negotiations, of course,
Yeah.
you led ministerial consultations. You were part of that group of countries together with France and many others to demand the inclusion of a roadmap to transition away from fossil fuels, of course, as you know. Can you describe the minimum elements that such a roadmap needs to include?
Well, look, I think that the truth is that the transition away it was very important at COP28 that we supported in the UAE that there was a commitment with the transition away. It's right. One of the things I said in the various events there were at COP30 is we should have this roadmap not because it's easy, but because it's hard. There's complex issues, let's be honest, for fossil fuel producers and the implications for their economies, indeed for fossil fuel consuming countries too, for making sure there's a just transition for workers, a whole range of things. And I think what's so interesting about what's come out of Brazil is, yes, it wasn't in the final text. It was a reference to the UAE consensus of COP28, but which we got inserted at the last minute. But something like 80 countries signed Global North, Global South, which goes to this point that there are, lots of countries are thinking this is in our economic interests, have now signed up to wanting this roadmap. And what is going to now happen is the Brazilian presidency will work with us and others on what this roadmap looks like and how it starts to chart this complicated course. Let's be honest, it's a complicated course to what this transition away looks like. And again, I think it's a hopeful sign.
The transition, I think the COP process, just in the same way that the economic force of gravity has kind of flipped, I think the COP process is now sort of trailing the economics of the energy transition. And its job is going to be to figure out how to kind of clean up as that transition goes on, how to make it possible, smooth it, accelerate it, all those things. In climate terms, the whole COP process hit its high water mark at Paris. And that's just that. I mean, there's not I don't think, a scenario where it drives climate consciousness forward in a relevant time frame going forward, but it can play a valuable role.
What does drive it, Bill?
Well, I mean, events drive it. If anybody thinks for a moment that people's understanding of climate change is going to go away. They need only wait for the next round of floods, hurricanes, windstorms, firestorms, whatever else. But the other thing that's going to drive it is the understanding that we now have a tool. Remember, the most of the climate era has been spent dealing with this problem without really a tool to deal with it. And now, as of 3 or 4 years ago, we have, in the form of cheap sun, cheap wind, cheap batteries, a tool. And it's the only tool that we're going to have in a relevant time frame. 25 years from now, we may have small modular reactors, we may have geothermal, and we may have, but in the period of time that decides whether or not we break the black back of the climate system, we have sun and wind and batteries. And that's good that we finally have a set of tools to use. And I think international diplomacy will be about figuring out how to deal with that transition, not in some sense drive it going forward, because other things are driving it.
I'm a bit of a defender of the COP process, just because I think it's partly because I think we'd never have got from 4 degrees to 2.3, 2.5, or 80% of the world being covered by net zero without this mechanism of accountability. And, it's a frustrating, mad system, but it is 193 countries trying to navigate their futures. So not surprising that it's quite complicated. And it does, and this is why I think it's good that Keir Starmer went and leaders continue to go, Chancellor of Germany and others. It does provide some kind of mechanism of accountability. But I sort of agree. What's happening in the real economy, which actually was quite on show at COP, is the most exciting thing, because it's actually happening. That you can see the transition actually happening.
Bill, I have to ask you a more personal question. You have been at this for quite a long time. Thank you very much. At the same time, every time you were almost there, a policy change happened, a new government happened, and you almost went back to square one. Does one need to sign up to a life as Sisyphus to work in climate?
That's not really how it feels to me. I mean, it feels to me, as I said, as if we got to the top, to use your image, as if we got to the top of a hill and the ball is now rolling finally in the right direction. The job is not Sisyphean. The job is to push that ball as hard as we can now that it's going in the right direction. The problem is that we wasted 30 years. We wasted it mostly because the fossil fuel industry gamed our political system enough to keep us from doing most of the advances that we've made in technology. We could have made 20 or 30 years ago. And so, we never get that time back, and the planet and its people are infinitely poorer as a result. But, doesn't do much good to, at this point, whine a lot about that. The job is to figure out now how to take advantage of the fact that we finally have a tool, because it would truly be a sin to waste it. And I use the word sin advisedly. I was in Rome in September with the new Pope, a weirdly normal American, I must say, very strange to see in operation. And he was great. And he said, we're doing the path that Francis has set out is the path that we will keep following. The Vatican will become the first solar-powered nation sometime next year when they flip the switch on this big new solar farm that they've built. I think that's, look, I said our slogan henceforth has got to be energy from heaven, not from hell. And that's the tool that we've got. We've got to ride it as hard as we can. We'll see where it gets us. And it's, completely possible that by 2030, we'll look around and we'll have to take other drastic action, because the physical trends we see on the Earth around the Atlantic currents, around the jet stream, around the savannification of the Amazon will have pushed us even harder than they're pushing us now. But we will be in a much better position to take whatever action we need to take if between now and 2030 we've built a hell of a lot of solar panels and wind turbines and batteries.
I share all your excitement about the technologies that are now finally at our fingertips and available and at ever lower cost. I do worry, though, about one thing I'm seeing, which are these ever more frequent policy swings. And your 2030 climate and energy strategy, of course, is banking on very large infrastructure investments for which investors need to have trust and policy certainty. And yet we see it in Brussels on the issue of the automotive industry, combustion engine bans. We, of course, saw it in the US. Yes, it keeps rolling, but a lot of investment has been destroyed. How do you reassure investors that there's enough policy certainty to follow your strategy, which many of them really want to support?
Look, I think as far as we're concerned, investors have a clear sense of our mission and have faith in our mission. And I've been struck, actually, the extent to which you can buy people into this argument. And by staying the course and by showing the progress you can make, I'm confident that we can. If the Vatican could do it, everyone can do it. If the Vatican, anyone can. Boom, boom. I mean, look, a few thoughts, I suppose. One, every fraction of a degree matters. I think it's really, really important, this. 1.5 absolutely matters, and we should keep 1.5 alive. But it's also the case that every fraction of a degree matters. I think, secondly, we talk rightly about negative tipping points, but there can be positive tipping points. If you look at what solar has done in the last 10 years, it's way exceeded the forecasts of the International Energy Agency and others. And I think we can see positive tipping points as these technologies become cheaper and you get greater deployment than you expect. And then thirdly, I suppose and I suppose the most important message for me is to all the people listening, reading, watching, is don't despair. I mean, despair is a completely futile thing. And I think part of the responsibility in all of this, and I think Bill does this very well, is to be a bearer of hope. Mm-hmm. You've got to be bearers of hope in this. Because if you send a message, personally, I don't feel despairing. I feel it's daunting and it's worrying, deeply worrying what is happening. But I feel hopeful, and I think we have a responsibility to be bearers of hope in this, and I genuinely think there are reasons for hope.
Optimism is the job.
I agree with that. It's easy to be despairing right now, especially in the U.S. We're in the grip of an illiberal and in many ways dangerous but farcical administration. But people are rising up and demonstrating that they don't like it. And I think that, knock on wood, that some sense will be restored here eventually. In any rate, climate change is about what happens on the planet. And on the planet, things are headed more in the right direction than they have been at any point in this period. What Ed says is the bottom line is absolutely right. To the best of our understanding, every 1/10 of a degree Celsius that we raise the temperature moves 100 million of our brothers and sisters out of a safe climate zone and into a dangerous one. So the fact that we can't stop global warming is sad, but the fact that we are in a position to save hundreds of millions of people from having to leave their homes should be more than incentive enough to keep everybody at work. And as for investors and things, look, anybody who's serious about looking at the future and understanding which way it's going is got to reach the conclusion that the human experiment with setting stuff on fire is coming to an end, and the human reliance on the sun, which already gives us, remember, light and warmth and via photosynthesis our supper, is now moving into an entirely new phase. In the longest historical sense, that's the meaning of our moment here. And our job is to accelerate that transition such that we save as much as we can of the world that we were born into.
In closing, question to both of you. You touched upon climate tipping points. Very quickly, what are the signs and signals we should watch out for as indicators of positive tipping points towards humanity embracing a climate positive future?
I think if I was an historian thinking about the moment, the fact that every Australian is going to get 3 free hours of electricity beginning next year is one of those moments that historians will one day use to dramatize the moment that we're in.
I think it's from every local solar project, wind project, nuclear, in my view. You see it around the world. I genuinely believe this transition is unstoppable. And I think actually Bill said it earlier on. The transition is unstoppable. The question is, can we do it in time and quickly enough? And acceleration is what it is all about. But there are, and I think it's in Bill's book, there are countless reasons for hope and optimism and positive tipping points.
Ed, Bill, thank you both very much.
Thank you both very much. What a pleasure to be in touch across the pond, and I'll look forward to getting over there before long and getting to look close up at what you're about there, Ed.
Thank you so much.
You've been watching an interview from the Prospect Podcast. To watch more of our interviews, click here or here, and to listen to this episode in full, click the link in the description below. To read or listen to more of Prospect's journalism, visit prospectmagazine.co.uk.